there's a black alert window in the evolution of code and tech, and quote unquote, you know, God's organic spirituality or whatever, right? So, we could all quote unquote agree on more or less, right? Because sometimes, like the predecessor said, the ancient teachings are saying there's the disagreeables and the agreeables on a whole 12,000 years ago, right? So let me read. So I'm trying to figure out whether I should do an astrological chart read, or should I do a new freestyle, right? And so just to slow it down, we could quote unquote agree on and quote more or less that there's a quote unquote a reason for everything, right? Like without having to, make an agenda out of it respectively with mature intelligence. What does that mean? Things are what they are, right? So we could agree that there's a quote unquote reason for things, right? End quote. So I'm not just going to splurt out quote unquote random shit, end quote, without us standing on a certain reason, because quote unquote America, end quote, America is like saying there's a freedom of speech from a different divine reason, right? So that divine reason let us quote unquote incarnate into quote unquote America, end quote, for us to lean towards quote unquote freedom of investigation, right? Innocent until proven guilty type of stuff. How ancient quote unquote beings of spirit, not necessarily extraterrestrials, ancient beings of spirit kind of interconnected with surface level physical sentience, quote unquote extraterrestrials and / humans, end quote. So what am I saying here? So what am I saying here? There's a divine reason for this stuff, And from that divine reason, we somehow have positive, quote unquote, positive karma, end quote, in like a non like good or bad way, in a non-human way. Positive just being the charge of electricity and how a battery has positive energy charge, right? So how a battery has positive and negative charge has nothing to do with human positivity or human negativity. The battery needs the positive charge and the battery needs the negative charge, right? So in the quote unquote spiritual aspect, end quote, we need that positive charge. And I did a different 8-minute underground video yesterday. Totally new stuff. And I might just play it right here. So without me jumping around, let me read this black alert screen. Moderation helps everyone feel safe to build a positive live chat experience for you and your viewers. Bullet point, choose who could participate. Bullet point, set a delay between messages. Bullet point, hide or put people in timeout. Bullet point, manage messages held for review. Bullet point, add moderators to your channel. Close, learn more. So I'm going to close that. Oh, hey there. So later I'm going to do like a quality freestyle, and there's a reason, there's a reason why things are doing what they're doing, right? Just to pause after that, right? Because if I talk elongated, then we're not going to kind of dwell or let the point that is trying to be made, we're not going to let it bake, right? bake in our mental intelligence of quote unquote consciousness, end quote, which is just a unified field of, you know, elements from a higher intelligence putting the elements together to make something new, and that new thing has a new sentience of intelligence, and that is expressing itself to have some type of journey through life and death in a different higher spiritual infrastructure field of life and death, for it to for it just to process itself, right? So the freedom of speech and the freedom of investigation, that's there for a divine reason, right? And what could that divine reason be, you know? Why certain districts and nations across the earth globe, the earth warfare, why is it that some countries have more freedom of speech than other countries? Like, why is that, you know? It's I would say the simple answer to that is some type of quote unquote spiritual mechanics, end quote. What does spiritual mechanics mean? It's a processing system that processes sentience of consciousness, and they have their own energetic karma of how they have a give and take relationship with nature. And from that give and take relationship from nature, we're getting processed accordingly, particularly unknown discreetly from the spiritual aspect of it, the nature aspect of it. So yesterday I did an 8-minute video of some totally new stuff, and I'll play that back later, you know. But I'm just trying to like kind of ground in like understanding collectively or individually or whatever, how freedom of speech was even like suggested and even kind of like quote unquote institutionalized, end quote, if I'm using that word correctly, meaning it's been penciled into the institution, right? Since like late 1700s. And shout out for everybody taking the account of the human accord of it, right? Because the human accord is just like, okay, yeah, it seems that these humans are just doing it off their own accord, and we're not seeing the influence of how these humans are getting the influence and the knowledge and the talents to even put the fucking Constitution together to begin with. And obviously there's other keynote speakers on where the founding fathers got their shit from, but that's a different topic of research, you know? So I'm just kind of intuitively like saying like, we're trying to understand the reason for freedom of speech and freedom of investigation. It's as if some higher God being giving us a chance to put it to some type of test, right? To see if what we're saying is like plausible, credible, accurate, if it's investigatable. This is like quote unquote America, end quote. I say quote unquote because obviously people could use that in some type of slick biasness, right? Or misunderstanding of it. So we're understanding the divine reasoning of why freedom of speech is a thing. So within this part of the human evolution game with unknown spiritual mechanics, we're seeing how the recent headline and the frontier of a particular type of human consciousness gets to delegate truth and intelligence, right? Because if there's no truth and intelligence, then things will just casually get like just kind of like mishapped and misconstrued just on a different level. So not to get too long-winded on that, the thing that we could agree on, quote unquote, end quote, is there's a reason for things that are happening, why they're happening. And what could that reason be? To see if the investigation of the proposal has some inkling of spiritual wholeness truth. What is spiritual wholeness truth? So in a different so that's part of the whole, that's part of the divine learning, that's part of the divine education, right? It's up to you to declare some type of verdict, right? Quote unquote, right? It's up to you to declare some type of quote unquote verdict, end quote. But just because we declare a verdict for us to say something is what it is, that doesn't necessarily make it per se ultimately final, even though it could be within this system of transit that it's in right now, right? So if we make it a verdict in our head, that kind of connects to our own interpersonal psychosis of how we're fixating psychological patterns, and we're feeling those psychological patterns to ingrain those as behavioral patterns, right? So these are behavioral patterns that we're ingraining based on our own genetics. Shout out to the original best metaphysical predecessors. So we're ingraining these psychological patterns through our human body, right? And once we do that, we could be energetically, quote unquote, fixed and quote unquote stubborn, end quote, with us being blinded to a different field of wholeness truth, right? Because we can declare a verdict for something to be what it is when that's just a subjective perception of what a different wholeness nature of reality really is, you know? So it's like the investigation here is like, okay, so someone will be like, what are you talking about? It's like just to have some professional intelligence. The topic of this discussion is who put freedom of speech in place? How is freedom of speech kind of getting more or less, quote unquote, energetically casually? And who has freedom of speech and who doesn't have freedom of speech? And why could freedom of speech be compromised, right? So the freedom of speech is there. It's like God's giving us that, you know, that quote unquote spiritual, quote unquote, weapon, end quote, or tool to defend ourselves, right? So there's a reason for these things, is what I'm saying. And we could more, and I say quote unquote, we could more or less agree on that, end quote, because it's one of those laws of nature where there's a cause to an effect, right? So whoever put freedom of speech into play, why do you think that happened? Why do you think America has freedom of speech more so than other countries? It's just a casual question. Like, why does America have more freedom of speech than other countries? Intuitively, for one, there's spiritual, quote unquote, spiritual mechanics behind the scene, end quote, that are making us facilitate our human consciousness and our human selves go through a process of an unknown incarnation system where we get to be born in America, and somehow within quote unquote positive karma, end quote, the positive energy we garnered, we're not born into the third world countries. So why are some people born in the third world countries and why are some people born in America? That's for you to investigate, right? So we could quote unquote agree, end quote, that there could be a reason for all of this shit, but it's up to our intelligence to see, quote unquote, what is the reason. Pause. So before this video, I'm either gonna do a quality freestyle of some shit, or I'm gonna read the astrology charts. And if I just reflect on my shit, and I haven't even started yet, you know, if I were to reflect on the last quality 8 years, I, of course, in due time would explain more or less, you know, my reasonings within the beyond resonance of relationships. What is beyond resonance of relationships? There's no dishonesty within the relationship, right? There's no hidden agendas within the relationship. That's what I mean by pure resonance. What am I talking about? What does pure resonance mean? It means you're resonating with someone else. You could have a friendship with someone else in a pure way, right? So it's in a pure way. Let me see. So it's not that I'm trying to like do it for anybody. I'm doing it for a different stream of balance. If I like explain my reasonings, I'm doing it for myself pretty much. And if I like when I explain my reasonings, like if I were to just like quote unquote call out this person, you know, it's like, why is it that you get to be in a position of status and you get to just fucking take new people's, you get a peep game and take tidbits of new game without you having to work for shit, and you just get to fucking deny and bypass different contexts of law, end quote. What is different contexts of law? How spiritual mechanics has their give and take, and how superficial mechanics have their give and take, right? We kind of just numb that out intellectually for whatever reason. So what I'm saying is there's reasons for everything, and we could more or less agree on that, right? And what's the reason that there's on the spiritual level, what's the reason for that there's 50% quote unquote destruction in 3D, 4D, 5D Earth? We're in 3 to 5 right now, respectively. And then underground quality audio podcasts, 8 years. So I'm just gonna read this. So before this, so if I explain my reasoning in the highest respective intelligence, it's from a state of balance, right? It's recognizing the reincarnation system, and you don't necessarily have to believe that. And if you don't believe that at all, you don't have to demonize it, right? But you can't say it's not possible that it could be proven in the future that there's a system of reincarnation. Animes from 1980s and 1990s talk about reapers and death gods waiting for mortal beings beyond this life. It's been like the ancient Chinese knowledge know it, but that I'm not trying to get like, I'm not trying to get off the topic, right? So I'm saying we could understand the reasoning for this stuff, right? So the reasoning here is like our new intent could understand different contexts of law application, metaphysically speaking. The different contexts of law is there's a give and take infrastructure process system, spiritually speaking, in the surface level manners and amplitudes and in the non-surface level manner and amplitudes. But that quote unquote deep advanced spiritual knowledge, end quote, it's going over our head. So we think we could just peep game and just take tidbits of other people's shit without there being a reaction or reciprocation. And then people want to like at the end of it play like the innocent card or whatever. And that's a different discussion, right? Like, oh, now they want to show this face when it's this. And I'm saying it generally, you know? And obviously there's more topics to be discussed. But before this video, I could do an 8-minute lyrical freestyle. I'm gonna pause it. Thank you, man.